Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce's Ukraine War News Update, first part thereof for the 29th of September 2023. Here is the General Staff figures, Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can see the caveats to this small segment in the description to the video below. So the Ukrainians are claiming 340 personnel were lost yesterday of the Russians, 8 tanks and 10 armoured personnel vehicles. That's give or take where it's been for the last, I guess, week or so. We've seen a drop in personnel lost, even though it is the most intense fighting in, say, Robotyne. There's a lot of operational security, a fog of war. We don't really know. I still don't know what's going on. There's absolute shutdown on information from what I can gather. I can't find anything about what is going on in Robotyne from the usual sources. So there's that happening, and you put that together with a drop in losses in personnel, and you're wondering a couple of things. One, is it just that it's so tough in that area that they're not worrying too much about adding up numbers? That's taken a kind of back seat, or it's only kind of going on there. They are fighting there at the expense of fighting anywhere else or in a number of other places. So the Velika Novosilka, Vasilivka direction, there is a lack of activity because it's all been drawn to one place. So it could be that a number of places along the front line are quieter, which means that overall there is a lack of personnel lost for the Russians. Of course, this says nothing about Ukrainian losses, and they will be fairly heavy, I would have thought, in the Robotyne direction. Right, 34 artillery systems, so that's still a high number. That is still a focus for the Ukrainians. They are really trying hard to attrit the Russian artillery capability. So there's one multiple launch rocket system, one anti-aircraft warfare system. 34 drones, that's not from last night, relatively quiet night last night. That would be from the night before. 21 vehicles and fuel tanks, and one piece of special equipment. So, again, in some of these key areas, it's vehicles and fuel tanks, artillery systems. It seems that you're always going to have high numbers at the moment. There is no let up in the Ukrainians' approach to degrading the Russian capabilities there. And I guess it's only as long as the Russians have that stuff to degrade will we see those numbers, right? Okay, now we look at Andrew Perpetua's loss statistics. I wonder whether we're approaching October, aren't we? And Oryx is going to stop in October. So I guess that Andrew Perpetua might be one of the main sources for this kind of information. There is War Spotting as well. Okay, Andrew Perpetua is a mapper who looks at the video evidence and imagery for losses over the last 24 hours, and he looks at a lot of Russian feeds as well. So he doesn't skew, even though he's morally pro-Ukrainian, he's not biased in the way that he approaches the evidence. He's pretty objective, and he sees here a lot of equipment across all the different categories. Yep, there's a recovery vehicle, but other than that, we've got just a whole range of stuff. Quite a few tanks. T90 to add there. There's quite a few T90s I've seen on lists over the last couple of weeks. They are losing a larger, I think, proportion of T90s compared to other tanks than certainly than, say, a year ago, where T90s were a rarity. And why we look at these kind of figures is to give us some kind of understanding of what's going on. What story do they tell? Like, I'm not really bothered that Andrew Perpetua has 5 tanks on his list today, but like the number 5, whatever. But does it tell a story? Are they losing more tanks than any other piece of equipment? What kind of tanks are they losing? So if over time we are seeing more and more T90 tanks being lost, and that they weren't being lost at the beginning of the war, even 6 months ago, then there's been a change of behavior. The Russians are using more T90s. They're putting them more in harm's way. So then the question is, well, why are they doing that? What story does that tell us? And I would suggest that they are running low on tanks, and they're having to bring their most coveted tanks, although it's not the T90M, it's the T90A, but T90M is the most recent, the breakthrough tank. This is not that, but it's still, your more highly coveted tank than the other varieties. So I think that it does indicate that the Russians are low on tanks. and that they are using their more valued tanks necessarily. They're being forced to. IFVs, trucks, and civilian vehicles are there as well. And when we come down to look at the Ukrainian figures, so I mean, this is pretty interesting because actually, if you take out boats, they basically lost very little. That Swedish provided Leopard 2 variant tank is obviously pretty problematic. That's damaged, but the rest of them are boats. So there's obviously been a montage video of Russians hitting Ukrainian boats, and that's a lot of boats. But the Ukrainians have done this over the last few weeks. They've released a bunch of montage bits of footage of Russian boats being lost as well. So there is, goodness me, I say this quite often about different forms of equipment. Like, would you want to get into an APC and go near the front line? You'd be thinking, am I going to be hit by a mine, or am I going to be hit by an FPV drone? So you must be so on edge the whole time. Well, boats in the Dnipro River Delta is the same kind of thing. Yeah, okay, my mission is to go out on a boat today. Yeah, but imagine you guys sitting at home or wherever you're watching this thinking, well, there's a 20% chance I'm going to have a drone drop a hand grenade on my head today. Like, that is the existential threat to these people's lives on a daily basis, and that's Russians and Ukrainians alike. Your mission is to go out on a boat today. We're going to do a little reconnaissance to some of these islands. You're thinking, brilliant, yeah, I'll do that, but there's quite a strong chance I'm going to die. But that's war, right? Of course, that's war, but just these guys are brave just in what they do on a daily basis. Okay, information has just appeared that the Russian anti-aircraft defense has shot down its own fighter jet near Tokmak. That came out last night, and then it's now all over the socials today. That this, I think, is pretty much confirmed. So I think it's a Su-35 that has been taken out. There is caught on camera. Su-35 went on its eternal flight. Apparently, the pilot has been lost as well, although this is somewhat unconfirmed, but it does seem to be a high probability claim here. That is another Russian friendly fire. That we've seen a number of these take place before, but it's also a pretty high value aircraft as well that has been taken out. And as I say all the time with these events, or any loss of aircraft, it's not so much the airframe that's being lost, it's about the expertise of the pilot. You can give him another plane if he was ejected and got back, but if he's dead, then the replacement for that human being is years and years of training, and that is going to be a big loss for the Russians there. Okay, Gimlers. Here's a montage of just 3 things being hit by Gimlers, sort of HIMARS or similar. What's interesting here is this is HIMARS or other Gimlers being used as counter battery fire. It's something we've seen before, of course. It's not new, but it does talk to how the high value rockets of the Gimlers are being used, kind of what they're being they've been designed to use for. But we're so used to seeing throughout the introduction of throughout the war, since the introduction of these HIMARS and similar, we've seen them being used on really high value targets a long way behind the line, troop accumulations, huge storage and ammo depots and whatnot. Well, actually, more often than not now, they are being used in counter battery fire, while the Storm Shadows are taking on that previous role. And it could be because there are so many targets that had been taken out within an 84 kilometer range. So now HIMARS are being largely used to affect this number here. So that 34 artillery systems lost in a day, you wonder how many of those will have been done by guided multiple launch rocket systems, as opposed to counter battery from, say, a Caesar or similar self-propelled gun. So yeah, there's evidence. So here we have a BM-21 Grad, so that's a multiple launch rocket system, 9P-140 Uragan 220 multiple launch rocket system, and 2 A-36 Jiatzin B field gun. So the range of artillery being taken out by guided multiple launch rocket systems. Right, here is a post that I thought was worth having a little look at. So Jankoy in Crimea, and just to let you know where Jankoy is, I probably should have brought my map up. Let's just bring that up. So anyway, in Jankoy in Crimea, we have evidence of an S-400 launch site. So this is a really high-value air defense system, the best that the Russians use. Now, this was seen on the 24th, satellite imagery on the 24th of September. Now, bear in mind, this looks like open source. So this is just someone looking at satellite imagery that they can get hold of themselves. So if we go to Jankoy, which is here in the middle of the north of Crimea, and it is also, as you might remember, a logistics hub too. There we go. They've updated their interface. I couldn't find any of the buttons. Right, so you can see that Jankoy is a logistics hub there, both in terms of road and rail. Well, yeah, so we have this S-400 that's there, still quite active with both 9-2N6 engagement radar, 96L6 acquisition radar present on the site. 5 TEL, so those are the Erector launchers, can be seen set up and ready to fire 48N6 missiles. We're still assessing the reported strike near this site, so there has been a strike on this site. A large burn scar exists just to the north of the air defense area. So if we have a look a little bit larger there, so just north of the air defense area, I'm not quite sure where that scar they're talking about is. I don't know if that's that darker area there or maybe north of here. I've decided to wait for more imagery regarding the attack, as we cannot identify what, if anything, was hit. But the point is that a few days after this was struck or was targeted in Jankoy, that's still up and running. I mean, this is, you would imagine, this is should be open season on this site, and this is really high value air defense system. I'd be like throwing everything I could at that. But then this is a problem that if Jankoy is, let's have a look how far back from the front lines that is. So we'll measure that from there. I guess the closest is going to be there. So, if you're going to hit that safely, that's going to be, let's have that in kilometers, please. That's 167 kilometers. So that's not going to be hit by HIMARS. That has to be hit really with something like Storm Shadow. And then that means that, well, Storm Shadow's not really going to be a likely munition to use against this. These are two kind of spread out. You want Storm Shadow to hit like a single building or high value target, just a single high value target. Okay, so you're going to have to use drones, but then this is an air defense system. Can drones get through? And this then leads you to think, well, ATACMS cluster munitions would be absolutely perfect for a site like this. So it's frustrating that this site is still operational by the looks of it, days after it was targeted. So the Russians haven't moved their stuff, and you've got open source intelligence being able to look at it quite openly. Yeah, there you go. So there's quite a lot of imagery coming out at the moment. Video evidence of POWs being taken. So this is in the Zaporizhia region. Russians wearing Ukrainian uniforms. This stuck out a little bit. Fighters 128 separate mountain assault brigade in cooperation with military intelligence captured an enemy unit which with Ukrainian uniforms tried to infiltrate into Ukrainian controlled territory to carry out sabotage. I mean, this is kind of grey area. The idea that this is perfidy and a war crime. I'm sure both sides have done this over the course of the war. I'm fairly sure I've seen evidence of both sides doing this. This is arguably a war crime, but one of those ones that has been done many times by many different armies throughout kind of history. Second World War, this would have been done a number of times, but of course the laws weren't really put in place till after the Second World War. Now, so I'm not justifying this. I mean, these are Russians doing that, but I'm fairly sure I've seen Ukrainians do this as well. It's just I remember giving you doing a segment on perfidy before, and talking about how interestingly spies are treated differently. So they are allowed to like dress up, as the opposition and disguise themselves, but soldiers are not. Like the rules are slightly different, and I think that itself shows you how difficult it is to make rules out of situations where there are no rules, right? So we construct rules. and things aren't. I mean, I don't want to bore you with the philosophy of this, but rules don't exist out there, right? And if they did, how would we know what those rules were? Like, I can't access abstract ideas that exist I don't know where. So either they don't exist out there, or they might as well not exist, because we have no way of knowing whether we have reflected some kind of objective reality in the rules that we make. The point being is that we try and make sense of the world, and we make rules, but the rules are kind of a rough fit for how life works, and life works in a lot of greys, not necessarily in obvious blacks and whites. This is why I have legal systems that argue to toss over everything all the time, because those ideas don't exist out there. They exist in all of our different minds, and we have to agree on them by consensus. So things like perfidy are kind of a best fit for, you know, what we do in war, but they're not going to be perfect. And so some people will say, yeah, that should be fine, that you should be able to do that, and other people say, no, that's definitely a war crime, and it's, you know, not acceptable. Okay, a dozen, but now this news piece is probably not the right time to investigate that. So a dozen surrendered on the southern front. So this is another piece of footage about, you know, people surrendering, and I've started seeing a number of these bits of footage turning up. I said the other week that I was seeing an awful lot more POW footage than I'd previously seen. So I think that is, again, what story is this telling us? The story is that there's a lot of fighting going on the front lines, and a lot of people are surrendering. And I think that indicates that possibly the Ukrainians are making advances. If they're advancing on positions and people are surrendering to them in person, then, you know, they are advancing. Okay, Ukraine armed. So going on to distant strikes, there's not too much news today across the board, really. Ukraine armed forces struck a storage in. Sorry, Ukraine armed forces storage in Bodanivka in Kirovograd region seems to be targeted. But this is a Ukrainian storage, and you see there's quite a lot of kit there. Although interestingly, you know, fairly spread out in places, not right next to each other. And then we have the firms data. So just to remind you, if you don't know what the firms data is, it's a NASA satellite system that was put in place originally to indicate where there are wildfires around the world, to try and tackle wildfires. But it's been used really well during this war to try and find out where there is a lot of not so wildfires, but still raging fires. Now, they need to be, there's lots of caveats attached to firms data. So they need to be substantial enough to be caught on firms data. They need to be taking place for long enough that like a satellite can miss fires if they take place and then they're put out relatively quickly. And by the time the satellite comes around to go over that it might have missed it the first time because it hadn't quite happened. And the satellite goes around, and then by the time it gets around to take a picture of it again, it's been put out. So it's not going to catch everything, so on and so forth. So, and it needs to be big enough in size. Anyway, here you can see substantial firms data to suggest that something is happening there. And here's another one in Kryvyi Rih as well, another Ukrainian armed forces storage that has been taken out and is indicated on firms data. So where's Bodanivka? Well, Bodanivka is Kiev. Here's Bodanivka. You got Dnipro, Kryvyi Rih as well. There's another one there. So this is fairly close to the southern front line. This is a sort of area you'd expect there to be exactly that sort of storage for not quite staging, but for supplying the front lines, but close enough to be useful, far enough away to be out of range of certain munitions. But here, obviously, they've been hit with, I'm not sure. But that is to say that don't think that it's just the Ukrainians that are hitting Russian storage facilities behind Russian lines. Although I think the Ukrainians are far better at doing that, and that is primarily down to, well, two things. It's target acquisition, so it's intel from current and excellent satellite imagery. They have access to the best in the world, where the Russians have very poor satellite imagery. And also munitions. The Ukrainians just have better munitions for doing that. Outside of the, you know, cruise missiles. So obviously Russia have more cruise missiles than the Ukrainians, but I don't think this is the sort of thing you'd use your cruise missiles on particularly. But I don't know. I could be wrong. Maybe they did. But anyway, we see that more from the Ukrainians than the Russians, but it's not to say it doesn't happen. And the Russians do hit these sort of sites. Right. And another hit from the Russians on the Ukrainians. So this is the Avdiivka coke chemical plant hit with an aerial bomb. So this is one of the workshops on fire. these are the FOB 500 bombs that are such an issue. I don't know where this is exactly. I didn't have time to research it, but I'm amazed that it hadn't been hit already, really. The video, The Consequences, is published by the former director of the ACCP, People's Deputy Musa Mohammedov. Anyway, that is a substantial fire going on at that coke plant, and that's again hitting the industrial capacity of Ukraine. Now, talking about hits on workshops, here we have a Shahed factory a drone factory on fire in Tehran in Iran. So the Iranian dictatorship supplies these drones to the Russian dictatorship to murder Ukrainian civilians. Okay. This is significant. I wonder who has done this. Is this Israel working? Because obviously this works for Israel as well as it does for Ukraine. We've seen Israel do this previously. We've seen possibly even the same factory. I don't know. But there were Shahed factories hit previously was it last year? I'm not sure. And the idea from some was, oh, this is great. This is Israel stepping up and helping Ukraine. But actually, that was just fortuitous collateral. Really, this was Israel helping themselves. This is in Israel's best interest, but it just aligns with Ukraine's best interest as well. If this has been done by Israel again, then that again is useful for Ukraine, or is it done somehow by Ukraine? I don't know, or maybe a collaboration. Are we starting to see Israel and Ukraine cooperate? I don't know, but that is very significant. We heard yesterday that Ukraine are going to start thinking about hitting sort of factory targets within Russia that are making these drones indigenously. So that might start happening. Here we have in Kursk, we have an electrical substation hit and burning there. That's hit by drone activity. That's still burning today. That was hit last night. There's thermal imagery of that taking place, and you've got the drones sort of recording that as well. And currently in Kerch, this was again last night, 9:20 last night my time. Currently in Kerch, Crimea, there's a very large fire. At least one of the photos is looking toward an area with a large amount of fields and bumpy terrain. There are claims that actually this fire was a grass fire as opposed to a particular target that's been hit. I'm not sure. This is pretty near to the Kerch Bridge and the crossing. There will be no doubt air defense systems around there to protect the bridge. Whether that has been hit, I don't know. Nonetheless, there's significant fire was taking place there last night. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces. Here we have Russian airports are paralyzed due to a cyber attack. Earlier, Russian media reported that Leonardo Airport check-in system is undergoing a massive DDoS attack from abroad. The DDoS attacks are where you overwhelm a system with hits on that system. And it can be fairly benign. You can I guess you can do support requests from their help desk or whatever, but you so overwhelm the system with automated bots and such that the system just crashes. And DDoS attacks are really common, low risk, high reward attacks that have been taking place for a long time across the world. DDoS attacks, they're not a new phenomenon. Here we have an airport getting taken out, and that affecting the Russians. So possibly we have Ukrainians or allies involved in cyber warfare hitting back at Russians. We know the Russians consistently do this kind of stuff against the Ukrainians. Right, what is going on with Ramzan Kadyrov, the Chechen warlord? Is he dead or is he not? Is he dying or is he not? There have been a couple of bits of footage released over the last few days, although timestamps are pretty difficult to come by, and I don't know when they were recorded because there were those rumors. I was reporting that he was dead. This one, it's said to have been edited a week ago, but analysts say that the warlord slurs his words so badly that he can barely speak. He doesn't sound well. So I think the bare minimum, bare minimum of what's happened to him is that he is very ill. Because if they're trying to prove that he's alive, they're proving that he's alive in ways where he doesn't sound very healthy. There's another video released of him with Putin, but I don't know if that was a previously recorded one. So this is from Igor Shushko, take it with a pinch of salt. Kadyrov was hospitalized in Moscow in May 2020, apparently for a COVID-19 reaction. So the jab, that would have been to one of the Sputnik, the Russian jabs. So, make of that what you will. His kidneys failed, requiring hemodialysis. Shortness of breath, lung damage and kidney problems persist to this day. In 2022, Chechen Health Minister Elkan Suleimanov gave him injections, one presumes to treat what his ailments were, but Kadyrov had an adverse reaction to those injections. As a result, Kadyrov had Suleimanov buried alive, and I've reported that. But that could be the narrative involved in that situation. Either way, he is at least ill. Right, Scott Ritter. This isn't particularly news, but it's kind of pertinent to present news. We need to go back more often to these people who make these huge claims. People like Colonel McGregor, people like Scott Ritter, that prop up, that give credence, that give credibility to the Russian narrative by being Americans. I always call this enemy attestation. If you have enemy attestation, it has higher value. If you have like a Russian saying like Khodorkovsky or someone on the front line saying, yeah, it's really terrible in Robotna right now, we're getting screwed over, that it has much more value than a Ukrainian saying that, because a Ukrainian, of course, is going to say that because it might be part of their propaganda. Whereas a Russian saying that it makes it therefore more likely to be true. So when Americans say how wonderful the Russians are, the Russians see that as enemy attestation, and rightly so. And they see it, even though he's like pro-Ukrainians would say, well, it's not enemy attestation because this guy's just in the pocket of the Russians, right? So it depends how you view it. But the Russians jump onto stuff like this because he's doing the work of their propagandists. So what we need to do is go back and look at their predictions and look at their claims and see whether they come true. And if they don't, if time and time again they are just BS, then they need to be called out and ignored. Now, you might argue, well, you should be ignoring him then. But no, this is a process of going towards ignoring him. Okay, let's just listen to what he says, because I'm only going to play half of this because the rest of it I'm going to deal with in an extra later today. The second half of this is interesting. I'm not ignoring that.
That if he doesn't get the Abrams tanks, if they arrive in August, it's too late. What do you mean too late, Zelensky? You mean you're going to lose the war? You mean you know what's about to happen to you? You understand what Russia's getting ready to do? You know that the Russians are already stressing the totality of the frontage with offenses that are working, and you have no reserves left, and you're committing what little reserves you have, and you're opening up additional gaps that the Russians are going to come in with 300,000 troops and slaughter your troops, wipe them off the face of the map. You know that's about to happen to you, right, Zelensky?
So he's saying, Zelensky, the reason why you say that Abrams coming in August is too late, and bear in mind, we're now the end of September and they haven't yet arrived. So this should already have happened. So Zelensky was apparently upset, according to Scott Ritter, that Abrams they were going to arrive too late, and August is too late. And it's going to be too late because Zelensky, that 300,000 Russians are going to slaughter the Ukrainians. Because the lines are stretched and the Russians are just, So has that happened?
Which is why you're saying if these tanks come in August, it's too late, because you'll be done by August. Zelensky knows this. Zelensky knows this.
So Zelensky knows, and Zelensky knows, that the Ukrainians are going to be done by August. Oh, yeah, no. September 29th, right, okay.
And everybody in NATO knows this.
Oh, do they?
The Ukrainians are tired of this war.
Okay, we're going to go on to that next part later. So that is just another really obvious example of how people like this are absolute fill in the space there, numpties that should not be listened to. They make prediction after prediction that do not come true. You need to don't just listen to someone. So if you're pro-Kremlin voice, you're obviously going to be jumping on this, but you are unjustified in doing so. I could talk to you about inductive reasoning. Like if you are betting on a horse that has lost 20 races in a row, and there's no indication that anything has changed in the setup there, then you are a stupid person if you're going to bet all your money on that horse winning the 21st race. You know, the form of that horse is poor, right? You are not justified in believing this guy because he's just consistently wrong about everything. So don't believe him. And he appears to be a paid up shill of the Kremlin. So, you know, there's that. Anyway, that's not so much news, but it's sometimes just worth dropping into these people again to just show them for who they are. Anyway, thank you so much. Please like, subscribe, and share. I have no resolution to my YouTube woes. In fact, I've received an email overnight that is just saying all the same stuff that the live chat people were telling me, and back to square one, really. So I'm kind of tearing my hair out. I'm gonna fire all my guns at one time, explode into space in my email back to them, and let them know what I feel. But anyway, just sort of let you know. Thanks anyway. Take care. Speak soon.